So my name is Dominique Martin. I'm a professor of ethics at the School of Management Sciences at the Université du Québec à Montréal. So first I want to welcome everyone to this conference in our speaker series. So today we will receive Les Nguyen Hoang that will give a conference on algorithms for good. So first, perhaps thank all of you for being here and for your continued interest in the series. So we have so this conference is the last conference on the website for the series so far, but we have another conference that is confirmed with Susan Schneider on May 13th, and we will post the information online as soon as we confirm the title of the conference. And we may have also another conference, perhaps in June or in April, but that's not confirmed yet. So there's still one or two conferences, one for sure, and perhaps two conferences left in the series. And also, I just wanted to say to everyone, before I introduce everyone and explain how things will work today, that the recordings of our previous conferences are also available online from our website. So those are the conferences from Carissa Félix, Martin Gibert, and John Danaher. And I also want to specify that we are recording the meeting today, as you may have noticed. So I am inviting everyone to keep their video feed open to make this interaction as human as possible. Normally we have these conferences in person, but we're doing this on Zoom, of course, given the circumstances. But so you are more than welcome to keep your video open. But if you don't want to be recorded, of course, you can simply shut it down. Okay, so the plan for today is to have these conferences, so for about 30 to 45 minutes. Then we'll have two discussants that will make comments on the conference for about 5-10 minutes each. So Daniel Wenstock, that I will introduce later, and Jason Stanley. And then I will offer an opportunity to reply, actually, to these comments. And then we'll have questions from the public. So the way we're going to work for the question, for those of you that are not familiar with these conferences, is that you can either write your name in the chat. And in that case, I will just give you an opportunity to ask your question. Or you can write your question in the chat. And in that case, I will ask the question for you. And I will re-explain that when we'll get to question time. Donc, bonjour tout le monde. Mon nom est Dominique Martin. Je suis professeur en éthique à l'École des sciences de la gestion de l'Université du Québec à Montréal. Je ne vais pas répéter toutes les explications que j'ai données en anglais. La conférence d'aujourd'hui se déroulera en anglais, mais je voulais simplement quand même vous souhaiter la bienvenue et vous dire que si vous souhaitez interagir en français avec notre conférencier ou nos commentateurs, vous êtes les bienvenus de le faire. Et donc, en fait, nos trois intervenants aujourd'hui comprennent et peuvent interagir très facilement en français. Donc, il n'y a aucun problème de poser vos questions dans cette langue. Et on y répondra en français aussi si besoin est. OK. So, Lee Nguyen Hoang, in fact, is a scientific communicator and researcher at the École Polytechnique Fédérale de Lausanne. He has been in Montreal for quite some time, actually. He has a PhD from the Polytechnique de Montréal here in the city, and then went to the Massachusetts Institute of Technology for a postdoctoral fellowship. He has published many books, in fact, that reach a very wide audience. The Equation of Knowledge, Le Fabuleux Chantier with El Madi, and Turin à la plage with Rachid Gueraoui. And he also runs a quite popular, in fact, YouTube channel called Science for All, which has many subscribers. And so perhaps I could just ask, so according to Wikipedia, at least, so you are a strong supporter of what I will translate as Bayesian probabilism. I don't know if that's the right translation. So, but basically, that's the belief or the epistemological view that rational belief or rationality in general are believed that have a sufficiently high level of probabilistic credibility. You're also a strong supporter of the public debate and deliberation and of the ethics of artificial intelligence. So I mentioned these things, I think, because perhaps they're relevant for what you're going to be talking about today. And so your talk will be entitled Recommendation Algorithm as a Fantastic Opportunity for Good. So you can go ahead, Lee, whenever you want. You have about 30, 45 minutes, and I'll make you signs if I see that it's taking up too much time.
Good. Thank you very much for the introduction. Yeah, I think it's, I would have loved to come back to Montreal, but doing this online, I guess, is interesting enough. So I'm going to tell you so about recommendation systems in particular and how to use them to make a lot of good, and especially what are the challenges in order to get this, and also a concrete proposal that we are working on to solve this problem. I want to start by stressing the importance of the problem. I think if you think about the artificial intelligences and the most sophisticated information systems that are deployed today and have a huge impact in the world, clearly, like recommendation algorithms and like Google search engine, like all of these algorithms that are used on a daily basis by each and every one of us whenever we open our laptop or phone, play definitely a critical role. Like they are used by billions of users, and they are like all the time in everybody's phone. Every time someone is opening the phone and clicking on an application on the phone, for almost all of these applications, there's going to be a very sophisticated artificial intelligence algorithm that's run in the background, especially for things like Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, or in this case, Google. And these algorithms have a lot of influence because they actually answer a lot of the questions that people are asking, either asking themselves without asking directly to the phone, or sometimes people are directly querying the algorithms to find what answers these algorithms output. And for many, many important topics for the future of humanity, like for instance, pandemic mitigation, for instance, social inequalities, or in this case, I'm taking the example of climate change. These algorithms play a critical role. In particular, a lot of people are typically asking to Google questions like, is climate change a hoax? And it's important to make sure that, well, the ethics of the algorithm is about what is going to be answered to such queries. And you can see on this slide, on this image that I've done, so this was done from Lausanne in private navigation a few weeks ago, I think. So quite recently. And if you look at the answers of Google, then actually there are quite good answers. Well, at least they are aligned with the scientific consensus that climate change is not a hoax. And yeah, the recommendations, as far as I can tell, are aligned with the scientific consensus. But this is not an accident. In fact, if you go to other search engines, so here's the example of Microsoft Bing. Well, on Microsoft Bing, the first answer is actually a conspiracy article. This is an article that's claiming that climate change is a hoax. So all Bing users, whenever they search something like this, they are confirmed maybe in their beliefs, because someone who's typing this question may be tempting to believe that climate change is a hoax. And this can have a lot of impact on the epistemics, what most people believe about climate change, which can then have impact on how easy it is to pass regulations for carbon emissions control or taxations and stuff like this, which can then hinder the efforts to combat climate change. And if you so I invite you to try as well, maybe after this conference from your own laptop or phone, and see what are the answers that you get. Here's yahoo.com. Interestingly, so the first link is just a redirection to another search engine. The second link is an ad, and the ad is actually saying, no, it's not a hoax. But then the first answer that's not an ad is actually answering, yes, climate change is a hoax. And yeah, the second, I think, as well, and the third as well. If you go to DuckDuckGo, so DuckDuckGo has very good privacy guarantees. But if you care about misinformation, then you can see that DuckDuckGo, in a sense, is providing results that are less reliable than Google is doing. And this all suggests that Google is actually taking extra steps, is doing an extra effort to make sure that their recommendation algorithm is going to be somewhat aligned with scientific consensus. So here's an example of Ecosia, which is another recommender system. Like Ecosia is this recommendation algorithm. Whenever you make a search engine, whenever you make a query, like some money goes to planting a tree. So it's supposed to be a search engine that's combating climate change. But when you actually query it on climate change, then you get answers that actually deny climate change. Of course, this is not an extremely realistic scenario because probably those who are using Ecosia are not going to search these kinds of queries. But it really shows that like just wanting to do good is not enough, and you actually need to actually change the algorithms if you want these algorithms to be aligned with what you would want them to be doing. The last example I'm giving is that of YouTube. So YouTube is also, so it's part of Google, and just like Google is promoting actually content that is defending the scientific consensus on climate change. And I want to stress the case of YouTube in particular, because YouTube is actually becoming bigger than Google as a search engine. There are more views today, and since actually 2016, there are more views on YouTube than queries, search queries on Google. So more often than not, people watch videos on YouTube than they search for answers on Google. And another important feature of the way people consume YouTube is that people actually don't query YouTube that much. Rather, what's happening more often than not is that people follow YouTube suggestions. So there's a recommendation algorithm on YouTube. Whenever you open YouTube on your phone or you open youtube.com on your laptop, there's going to be a recommendation algorithm that's going to select out of the millions of videos on YouTube, which one will be shown to you. And of course, every time there's something like this, it's a small dilemma, like more often than not, it's not a question of life and death. But the important thing is that this happens all the time. This happens on a scale that's unprecedented, at a huge scale. YouTube now represents over 1 billion hours of watch time. So these are figures from 2019. As we all know, 2020 was full of lockdowns and restrictions, and because of this, like the consumption of social media has increased a lot. So we should expect these numbers to be even larger today. So 1 billion hours of watch time. Maybe today is gone a lot more, but let's say just 1 billion hours of watch time. This is half an hour for 2 billion users. There are around 2 billion users on YouTube. This is enormous. And you can really nudge people video after video towards either more reliable contents and healthier habits and overall better quality contents, or you can nudge people towards radicalizing videos, or they can be nudged to conspiracy theory videos. And so the impact here is really huge. I think this is something important to keep in mind. Another important thing to keep in mind is that the recommendation algorithms play a big role. So 2 views out of 3 on YouTube, 2 times out of 3, a video is watched because it was recommended through the recommendation algorithm. So most people don't search for what they're going to watch. They are exposed. What they're going to watch is at least partially chosen by some algorithm. And it's not like this algorithm cannot stop doing recommendation. When people go on YouTube or when people make queries on YouTube, they expect an answer. So the YouTube algorithm really has to solve this decision problem of what it is that I'm going to show when I'm queried, when a given user is going to go on YouTube. And also maybe one thing to stress is that these kind of results are going to be extremely personalized. Like we all have very, very different YouTube. And my experience on YouTube is clearly very different from a lot of other users' experiences. Partly because I watch a lot of mathematics on YouTube. So really, YouTube is facing a dilemma in a sense. Every time someone is going on YouTube, the YouTube algorithm is faced with a dilemma. What is it that I'm going to show to the user? Am I going to show the most popular videos? Am I going to show the videos that the user is going to want to see? Or am I going to show more reliable videos? Or am I going to show videos that are most likely to improve the epistemic understanding of a problem by the user? More often than not, it's not a question of life and death. These are small dilemmas, but every now and then you do have questions that are matters of life and death, and this happens a lot, especially with public health concerns. So this issue of recommendation algorithms and social medias and these platforms is something that has been is being more and more discussed, I think, with good reason. So these are two documentaries on Netflix that are discussing issues around these, revolving around these platforms and algorithms. On the left is the Great Hack. So the Great Hack is telling the story of the Cambridge Analytica Facebook scandal. And I would recommend watching this documentary, but if you do, I would also recommend watching it with a kind of a skeptic eye and asking yourself, what is the problem that is discussed in this documentary? Because I see at least two different problems discussed in this video. The first one is has to do with privacy and the protection of personal data. Of course, it seems dangerous that there's a massive surveillance made possible by some governments or some private companies. But there's another issue that's discussed in this documentary, which is the problem of manipulation, particularly here political propaganda at scale. And in a customized way, which makes it probably a lot more effective by personalizing the message to the right user. This makes this kind of political campaigns a lot more effective, and maybe like a lot more dangerous in a sense, because if there's bad actors that want to convince a lot of people of something. And by the way, this happens all the time on the internet. The internet is full of malicious entities, or at least entities that are motivated by some goals. So this can be governments, this can be governmental agencies, this can be private companies that have strong incentives in promoting either the products or maybe criticizing a law. And a lot of research has found that there's more and more organized disinformation campaigns on these platforms. And so privacy and manipulation allowed, for instance, by a lack of moderation. These are actually two different issues that can be in tension intuitively if a lot of content is completely private or very well encrypted. Then it's very hard to do any kind of moderation, because you don't get to even see what is the content that is being shared. And the tension between essentially privacy or anonymity and moderation, I think, has become more and more quite clear, let's say, in the recent events with the Capitol events in the US. And the discussions that follow these events with, for instance, the social media called Parler, which has very low moderation. And because of this, there's a lot of extremist movements and radical messaging that was shared on this platform. And it was so bad that at least it was judged so bad by Google and Apple and Amazon that Google, Apple, and Amazon have decided to shut down Parler. So Google and Apple removed Parler from their the Play Store and the App Store, and Amazon that was hosting the servers of Parler decided to remove the content of Parler from their servers. Yeah, so I think it's interesting to see that there's these tensions. The documentary on the right, The Social Dilemma, it came out a few months ago, and it's a documentary about social medias as well. It lists all sorts of realms on social medias. I think it's very interesting. Again, I would recommend to watch it with a little bit of skepticism, but I think the scale of the problem, I think, is quite well underlined, even though, I may have a, well, it's a complicated topic, and there would be further things to be discussed about this documentary. Yeah, so this is what I said about the tension between privacy or anonymity or free speech in general, and the problem of moderation. So, as I said, Amazon, Apple, and Google cut off Parler, and quite, let's say, interestingly, there was some non-governmental organizations that following the events of the Capitol, decided to sue Apple because Apple removed Parler, but they did not remove Telegram, and apparently there's a lot of radicalization messaging that actually goes through Telegram, maybe even worse than through Parler. And it should be said that Telegram is still open by default. By default, if you're sending messages on Telegram, they are not encrypted. But you could imagine that if there's more and more measures taken like this by Apple and Google and so on, these more radicalized group will be using more and more things that are more encrypted. So typically, well, the encrypted version of Telegram or Signal or even WhatsApp to propagate their messages. And I'm saying this not to say that Signal is bad. Like, I am personally a user of Signal, but it stresses the difficulty of understanding what's going on these platforms. We know that there's a lot of disinformation going on platforms like Twitter or Parler or Telegram, because we get to survey, you can see the content that is shared on these platforms. Arguably, it's a lot harder to do content moderation if everything is shared on more private platforms. I really want to stress the idea that what's going on today on social medias is now has become a matter of national security. This is what's discussed in the video on the left by Smarter Everyday, where he interviews, I think it was a 4-star general, like a well-graded general of the US force, and the general is essentially saying that we used to have this division in terms of land, Navy, Air Force, and all the others that I don't really remember. But one thing that is becoming more and more important in terms of national security is actually the protection in the cyberspace, and in particular on social medias. Because today, one of the most straightforward way to attack, for instance, the US, is to create a lot of fake accounts on these platforms and to create a lot of tensions and appearing conflicts between different subgroups in the US, and this applies for many countries in the world. If you want to harm a country, especially with the COVID-19 situation, propagating a lot of disinformation about COVID-19 can be actually a very effective way. And there's a lot of, so on the right, you see a project from the University of Oxford. It's called the Computational Propaganda Project, where they're really trying to track, and what they found out, unfortunately, is that more and more countries, so I don't remember the exact figure, but they've listed, I think, over 80 or 90 countries in the world that were actively engaging in disinformation campaigns. And these are things that have been only revealed. Of course, these disinformation campaigns have no incentives to be publicly known, and thus we should expect that a lot of them are still actually deep under the radars. So these were kind of like the bad sides of these social media platforms and the recommendation algorithms. The title of this talk has the word fantastic opportunity in it, because I do want to acknowledge a lot of the issues, but also try to envision what could be achieved if we made a lot more effort to make these recommendation algorithms more aligned with what we would want them to be doing, what we really want them to be doing, in particular to achieve more noble goals. So the article, so I wrote these two papers that have been published in the last few months in peer-reviewed journals. So the one on the left is in Frontiers. It's a paper arguing that science communication, which is something I'm deep into as a science communicator myself, in particular as a science YouTuber, clearly the number of views that I'm making is extremely dependent on whether the YouTube algorithm is going to recommend my videos. What I'm arguing in the video on the left is that for a long time, the main bottleneck of science communication was the creation of a lot of quality science communication contents. But arguably over the last few years, the last decade, there have been a huge amount of top quality science contents that have been produced on YouTube. And because of this, now the big hurdle to improving the understanding of science literacy, for instance, in the wider audience, has become no longer the production of the content, but rather its dissemination. And the dissemination of this content hugely depends on recommendation algorithms. And you could be doing a lot good, you could improve a lot of education throughout the world just by promoting more such science communication content instead of recommending them once every 20 videos. If you recommend them once every 10 videos or once every 5 videos, then you could easily double the reach of these science communication contents. And in the context that we are living through, this seems like very important. Asian countries, for instance, typically Taiwan in particular, but also Vietnam and South Korea, are quite known for the quality of the science communication and the science literacy there is over there. And in the article on the right, we're making the case with two colleagues that these recommendation algorithms could be doing a lot of good for public health if they were used to promote the quality messaging on social medias about public health. And this is actually like something that's done a lot, especially during the COVID-19 situation. We had public service announcements that were spreading a lot of messages about public health. So these were governmental directed communications, but we can have them scaled at a much larger scale by using recommendation algorithms. So what I hope to have convinced you of is that we've reached a point where YouTube must do good. Like the scale of the issues and the scale of these opportunities are so huge that it's become crucial that we seize this opportunity to do a lot more good. But there is a problem that needs to be solved to get there, and it's the fact that it's very uncomfortable, at least, that YouTube would decide what good means. I think a lot of us would disagree with this. And I think even YouTube themselves, at least Mark Zuckerberg, likes to say that he does not want to be the arbiter of truth. And similarly, in the same vein, I think we need to have a more robust solution to deciding what good means. Now, this leads me to an idea, which is the idea of alignment. So the idea of alignment is making sure that the objective function of these algorithms that we're deploying at scale, which unfortunately today, usually this objective function has to do with attention maximization, but it would be a lot safer for mankind and for the well-being of a lot of people if this objective function actually contained the ethical values that we have, and it was actually doing what we would really want it to be doing. So the idea of alignment is to make the goal of these algorithms aligned with human preferences. And by algorithms, I don't actually mean only recommendation algorithms, but more generally, all sorts of entities. You can think of democratic representatives in democracy. You can think of institutions, all sorts of public institutions, and also private companies. So unfortunately, right now, these algorithms are not aligned. As I said, they are really maximizing attention to then have the opportunity to sell ads. And this has a lot of side effects, meaning that by trying to reach this goal, these algorithms have what economists would call externalities. So it has spillover effects that can be extremely bad. And they are extremely bad today because they are at scales that are extremely huge. So I highly recommend this book by Zenepe Tufekci, Twitter and Tigaz, that discusses a lot of this. Now, one big challenge of solving the alignment problem is that, unfortunately, ethics is not easy. And a lot of great writers have written a lot of interesting things about ethics, but a lot of them still disagree at the end of the day about a lot of quite fundamental aspects. So clearly, ethics is not going to be easy. It's not like we need to reflect and to work to achieve to reach some solution for alignment. Now, interestingly, there's potentially a precise sense in which ethics is complicated. At least if we use the language of computer science. In computer science, there's a notion of complexity known as the Solomonov or the Kolmogorov complexity, which is essentially the number of lines of codes that you need to describe your ethics entirely, like everything that you think is desirable from an ethical point of view. And in our book, Le Fabuleux Chantier, we make this claim. Actually, it's a kind of a modest version of the claim we actually believe, but we make this claim that if we want to make ethics computable, and by computable I mean executable by a machine, if you want to have a satisfactory computable moral philosophy, then we will need more than 500 pages to describe it, and probably a lot more, probably at least millions or if not billions of lines of code. And there's a very simple reason to argue this.
Oui, hello?
Oui? Yeah, somebody interrupted. Yes, sorry. Is it working? Okay. And there's a very there's a very simple argument to argue to conclude that ethics is necessarily a very, 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 very long book, at least, is the fact that no computer scientist to this day has been able to define what a cat is. At least no computer scientist has been able to write down an algorithm that's executable by a machine that enables the machine to know that there's a cat or not on a given image. And actually, this was argued by Alan Turing, paraphrasing a lot of the things he was saying. But in his 1950 paper, so a very old paper, Alan Turing had already this brilliant insight that probably very interesting algorithms, so typically algorithms able to solve the Turing test, or algorithms able to recognize a cat, will necessarily need at least, well, he was giving like this ballpark figure of 10 to the 9 lines of code. And Turing problem with this is that it's just too long to write. So Turing says that he was able to write 1,000 lines of code per day, but to get to 1 billion would take him just too much time. And because of this, Turing argues, we cannot write down, we cannot explain to a computer what a cat is. And this is a big issue because typically we would want to say that it's not ethical to torture cats, but just formalizing this sentence, just making sure that this sentence is understood by a computer, according to the argument I'm making, like it requires at least say millions of lines of code. In fact, the only way we've managed to do this is by using machine learning. And that's actually the reason why Turing argues that in 1950, so quite a long time ago, he already argued that we need machine learning. Well, he invented, well, Turing is a brilliant guy, but he had this idea that we absolutely need machine learning because the problem that we need to solve have too large of a Solomon complexity, as we would call it in computer science. And this means that we need to do machine learning. What is machine learning? Machine learning is essentially relying on data to learn. It's like you can think of this as an evidence-based way of determining algorithms. You're building upon data to determine what the algorithm should be doing. And so data is going to influence algorithm. It's data-driven sometimes. Sometimes we use this phrase. But this also means that data is controlling these algorithms. If you change the data, then the algorithm is different. And this is a big issue because today's algorithms rely on data provided by users. So if users' data is corrupted, if it is biased, if it is maliciously crafted, then it can completely manipulate the algorithms in a very bad way. And we've seen a lot of examples of this. So for instance, on the left is OpenAI's GPT-3 algorithm that has learned to be to associate Muslims and violence or terrorism, because in a sense it was manipulated by the text it has read, which contains a lot of Reddit content, and the content of Reddit is not filtered or arguably it's not sufficiently filtered, at least for quality. Yeah, so I'm running out of time, so I'm not going to go give you all the details, but if you don't know about CROC, just Google it. CROC is a fascinating thing that's going on.
You still have a bit of time left, by the way, so you can still keep going for 5 or 10 minutes. There's no problem. If you want to take the time to say this.
Yeah, but I have a lot more. I'm going to skip this. So what I mean to stress by that is that an algorithm whose goal depends on uncontrolled data, so if the goal is learned or is dependent on data that is not controlled, that is not safe, then the algorithm itself cannot be considered as safe. It can be arbitrarily manipulated. And this means that there is an urgent need to build up something that is going to be able to train the goal of these algorithms. And this something needs to be data, but it also needs to be reliable data. It needs to be secured, and it needs to be large as well, because in machine learning, we need large amounts of data to reach any kind of performance. And of course, this database, if you want to do alignment, if you want to make sure that the objective function of the algorithm is what we would really want it to be, this database should contain information about human preferences. And maybe even volitions. So the difference I'm making between volition and preferences is that preferences is like what you prefer right now, like without thinking too much. Maybe you're a bit tired and you go on YouTube and you click and you express, when you're on YouTube and you're tired and you're clicking on a video, you're expressing a preference, but it's not like a well thought preference. And so what I mean by volition is something that's more thoughtful, where you reflect more on what you would really want for yourself and for humanity. And arguably, we need a database that contains information about such human volitions. And this leads us to our proposal to solve this problem, which is called TunaSoul. So it's already available on the internet, TunaSoul.app, so TunaSoul.app. It's still in beta test, so please be forgiving, and please tell us if there are bugs that you see. And the idea of TunaSoul is to collect such data and thereby also trying to solve the problem of collaborative content recommendation. So the idea of TunaSoul is if you go on the platform, you create an account, then you can take any 2 videos on YouTube. So we recommend to use to take 2 videos that you really enjoy, that you already watched and you really enjoyed. And then we ask you to compare these 2 videos along different quality criteria. Like you should typically tell us which one do you think is more reliable and not misleading? Which one is more important and actionable? Like it gives something that should be shared because it's about something important. And which one of these contents is more engaging and thought-provoking? This slider is particularly in reaction to YouTube's reaction to at the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic, where what YouTube did to guarantee the quality of the reliability of the information that's shared on YouTube is they upvoted, essentially upgraded the videos by the World Health Organization. And these are very reliable information, but arguably it's not really engaging. Like you're not going to make millions of views or catch a lot of people's interest by sharing these videos rather than other videos made by YouTubers that are better, let's say, at optimizing for this metric. In the settings, there are more quality criteria that you can add, like diversity and inclusion, like pedagogy and so on. So if you want to tell us more precisely your judgments about the different videos, well, you're more than welcome to do so. And you have also comment spaces and so on. And then based on this data, then we run a very simple, I don't say very, but simple machine learning algorithm that's been designed for robustness. So we want to make sure we're controlling exactly what this algorithm is doing. And this allows to compute scores for different videos along the different metrics, and then a user can customize their preferences about the different metrics and also enter a search phrase. I do want to talk briefly about a few challenges that we face with TunaSoul. So the long-term goal of TunaSoul is to have very reliable scores so that we can use these scores to either audit the recommendation algorithms used by social media companies, or we can ask these social media companies to eventually maybe use our scores. Of course, this will not be done unless there's sufficient social and maybe even legal pressures to do this. But in order to get there, we really need to make sure that the scores we're computing are really reliable. And the reliability of the scores depends on the quality of the contributors. In particular, one thing that we really need to avoid is fake accounts. Forget I've shown you the next slide. What do you think is the number of fake accounts on Facebook? Maybe you haven't had the time to read what was on the slide. What do you think is the number of fake accounts removed by Facebook in 2019? What's the order of magnitude? Would you say like thousands, tens of thousands, millions? Well, the answer is 6 billion. There were 6 billion accounts that were removed on Facebook in 2019. That's way more than the number of human users on the platform. Meaning that on Facebook, most accounts are fake. And this creates a big issue because then you can have a lot of these fake accounts that are used to manipulate either the Facebook users or the algorithms. And so we want to prevent this on TunaSoul. And a solution to do this is that in order to have, anyone can create an account, but to have an account that is going to have an influence on the TunaSoul scores, we demand that the contributors validate an email from a trusted institution. So typically polymtl.ca or maggle.ca would be considered as trusted email domains. Another problem is that even if you have this protection, we cannot expect that the 100% of the data will be reliable. There may still be malicious contributors out of the many people at McGill. Well, I guess it's a Canadian university, so it's excellent, but let's say MIT.edu, yeah, maybe there's going to be at least one malicious contributor. And we need to have these algorithms that are robust to this. So this is a line of research that we very much engaged in. So this is a paper that we wrote with collaborators at EPFL that is trying to solve this problem of what we call Byzantine collaborative learning. Byzantine, in the terminology of the field, is a bad guy, a very maximally bad guy. And a third thing that we're thinking about is the problem of incentives. So typically, if you just take the average score, then people will have incentives to exaggerate the scores in order to manipulate the scores. And we protect against this by having strategy-proof algorithms. So this is still a draft of a paper. It's not accessible yet, and we're still working on it. We have proved the theorems, but we're still polishing it. And it's studying some solutions to have a strategy proofness, especially in high dimensions, like agreeing on multiple scores, typically. Yeah, I just mean to show that there's interesting research to be done when trying to guarantee the reliability of these platforms. And there's a lot more research directions that we are interested in. Especially if you're into mathematics, please check us out. So yeah, this is on the white paper of TunaSoul, which is accessible on the website TunaSoul.org. Okay, so I'm going to conclude, I guess. So a few messages with which I would like to leave you. The first is that we need you. TunaSoul app is a collaborative platform, and if we ever want to hope to be taken seriously by Google or to be a useful tools for researchers, we need a very large database. So the main message, I guess, is like we need contributions to determine what is good, essentially, to answer the question, what is good, to collectively answer this question. Right now, we're not quite there yet because the platform still has bugs and it's not quite ready. So right now, our needs is more like people testing the platform or providing data that allow us to test the algorithms and make sure that the algorithms are indeed doing what we want them to be doing. We also need like all the contributions from a more technical point of view, and also from a design point of view. And so, yeah, maybe you can discuss this in the questions. And finally, I want to leave you with 3 remarks with the 3 main messages of our book, Le Fabuleux Chantier with El-Mahdi Hamdi. The first message is, I hope I've somehow, at least partially convinced you that making algorithms robustly beneficial has become urgent. These algorithms are already deployed on massive scales, and they already have huge impacts, and I think we've seen this a lot in 2020. The second thesis, I hope I've also convinced you of this, is that it's also extremely hard. Like, it's not something that's going to be solved just by good intention. We actually need to sit down and reflect a lot and prove and construct a roadmap and have, if possible, theorems that justify our designs, and a lot of data to test this, and a lot of cross-validation and testing and so on. This is a big endeavor. But the last and arguably most important message that I want to leave you with is that sure, it's a big endeavor, and sure, it's like it may be regarded as a moral duty in a sense, but the message I want to leave you with is that it's above all, I believe, a fabulous endeavor. These are the most exciting ideas that I've ever encountered, and I know about Bayes' rule, so I'm putting this above probability theory, which I love as well. But this is like really deep because it's about finding pragmatic solutions to solve both things on an epistemic level, but also tackling collectively, in a collaborative and robust manner, the problem of solving ethics, at least the ethics of algorithms. And with this, I thank you for your attention.
All right, well, perfect. Thank you very much, Lee. Yes, I think you deserve a clap. So it is a fabulous endeavor indeed. I think it's really nice to see people that are actually tackling these big problems that we are facing as a society, as opposed to simply further problematize these issues, which is sometimes perhaps more the kind of work that we're doing in the academia as ethicists, say. So we now we're going to have two comments on your talk. The first one will be from Daniel Wenstock and the second from Jason Stanley. And after these two comments, I will give you an opportunity to reply, in fact, to the points that will have been raised. So let me first introduce Daniel Wenstock, who's a professor at McGill University. So he's both, well, he's in law at the philosophy department, but also at the Institute for Health and Social Policy. And he is also the Catherine Person, chair in civil society and public policy in the faculties of law and of arts. And he has way too many publication talks of public intervention or other civic engagement to make any comprehensive review. But you can go ahead, Daniel, and you have about 5 to 10 minutes.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much for that fascinating talk. And I guess in the spirit of collaboration with the general spirit of the project, what I want to do is perhaps ask a few questions that would allow you and the people that you work with to refine, what you're after. So I've been spending a lot of time the last year, as we all have, worrying about this virus that's been going around. I don't know if you've heard of it, COVID. I think that it's a very good example, COVID and the policy reactions to COVID, now the vaccine. It's a very good example of the, first of all, the absolutely unmanageable extent of information that is out there, right? For any person who goes on to Google, is my cough a sign that I might have COVID? There's an explosion of information, misinformation, deliberate disinformation. But there's also a necessity for, information and for regulating information. So the first point I want to make is I want to think about what an ideal would look like. Imagine that instead of having this sort of anarchic explosion of information governed by algorithms that have all of the pathologies that you identified, what would it look like if it were good? If it were useful and if it tracked what we wanted to track, the information that we get through Google. So this is where there's a first point, perhaps of clarification or perhaps mild disagreement with your view. When you mentioned the contribution of ethics, you use the term, and it's very understandable that you would use the word good. We want it to be good, but there's disagreement amongst philosophers about what is good. But I think that in a way, looking in that direction might be a bit of a red herring, a bit of a false piste relative to what we want. I would think that what we would want is to open up our computers and ask a question and see something like reasonable disagreement, right? Reasonable disagreement. So right now what we have is kind of everything but the kitchen sink, unreasonable disagreement and reasonable disagreement. So we know that, there are people who are pitching conspiracy theories about vaccines. It's, Bill Gates who wants to implant 5G. I don't know what he wants to do. But then there's also reasonable disagreement where the consensuses are laid out alongside the areas where there's still disagreement. I mean, one of the things that's fascinated me a lot is, we're presented with models about the potential evolution of the virus, where some models go like this, by pointing upwards. Some models go like this. And what is clear is that what epidemiologists disagree about is what are the values to plug in, right, at the outset in terms of rates of infection, in terms of rates of contact between people. And people can reasonably disagree about that, right? Will this measure lead to this much reduction of contact? So what I would want to see is a Google search engine that would be governed not so much by something on the order of the good, but of the reasonable. Because I don't think that what I would want is something, so the extreme that we have now is anarchy, everything but the kitchen sink, reasonable people getting drowned out by the noise of people who are, just saying anything because they have political agendas or because whatever. But I wouldn't want the other extreme, which is, kind of unrepresentative consensus. I wouldn't want it to be the case that whatever I did was, going to lead to the information that I receive on Google just being, too little rather than too much, representative of a partisan viewpoint, not giving me enough of a sense of the full extent of debate and disagreement that is out there about various aspects to do with COVID or with whatever important issue that people want to deal with. So that's one of the reasons, for example, one of the things that you didn't mention as a possibility for solving this problem is some kind of state intervention, right? Some kind of regulation by the state or by state-like agencies, either at the national or maybe even at the supranational, international level. And I think that to the extent that you did include it, there might be issues of feasibility. How could a state, possibly even conceive of regulating something that is as territorially diffuse as a Google or whatever. But there's also a question of, is that the way that we would achieve what we want? In other words, we might suspect that even if the technical problems were put aside, we would still have state agents who are motivated by a certain interest other than, the reasonable rather than the good. And so another point that I want to make about the reasonable is I think that it's in a way kind of easier to define the boundaries of the reasonable than the boundaries of the good. The good of human life, it's a question that philosophers have been dealing with for ever since there was philosophy. And in a way, the whole point of it is that we'll never disagree. Part of the good for humans is the fact that they continually debate and discuss the good and disagree about the good for humans. But one of the advantages of the reasonable is that it's a less sexy concept maybe, but it's one about which we can arrive at rough and ready definitions of. For example, we can proceduralize it, right? And that's one of the directions that I see TunaSoul as going in. We're going to say, we're not going to define the reason, what's reasonable, what a reasonable contribution is, but we're just going to sort of filter the types of contributors. So you said about, just having people who are validated, who have an email address that's validated through a university like McGill. Of course, if you use McGill, all your problems would be over. We would be fine. But the worry that we would have there is that we might end up with a kind of an unrepresentative sample of the reasonable views that are out there, because after all, us academics are not, there may be things that fall that people should be exposed to, were they to want to, that would fall sort of between the cracks. So I guess I don't have actually much to add. That was the main point that I wanted to make, is think about the internet as a place where the algorithms lead us to a representation, not of what's good, but of what is reasonably held by reasonable people out there with their disagreements. And then the question is, how do we find a way of filtering the sort of inputs into TunaSoul in a way that would kind of approximate that. And my guess, well, I don't know. I mean, I'd wanna maybe ask you as my main question. You know, if you follow me thus through the steps in what I've said, and you kind of agree that what we want is a portrayal of a kind of sphere of reasonable disagreement, is your set of filters the way that you select participants, for example, by coming to this forum and telling all of us to go and sign up, is it likely to be the right way of going about it, or might we be in a way too restrictive? Because you know, as academics and maybe people working in the AI field, we're you know, maybe our views of things are narrower than we would want them to be in this sort of ideal picture that I've painted. So I hope that that's a sort of relatively clearly formulated question. And I'll stop there, Dominique.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Daniel. So this was very interesting. So our second and last discussant will be Jason Stanley. So Jason Stanley is the head of insights at Local Logic. I must say right off the bat, this is a title description that makes me a little bit jealous. I would love to be head of insights somewhere in my life. But anyways, all personal remarks left aside, you were also, so before that, you were a design research lead at Element AI. But I think you also have a background, in fact, in the social sciences. So you have a PhD in sociology, and you've worked on question of public policies. And you have been a speaker also on issues of what I would call data justice and human-centered innovation for many years, in fact. So it will be really interesting to hear your perspective, Jason. So go ahead. You have about 5 or 10 minutes.
Yeah, thanks, Dominic. And thanks very much to Leah. I really enjoyed the talk, and I loved discovering the material. I went through some of the readings and your white paper on your website and stuff. So very interesting. I just want to start by saying I find this area of work super exciting. One, sorting the wheat from the chaff, as you say, like making sense of finding the signal in the noise. Super important, as you pointed out. It's also super hard. So for those reasons, like, it's really exciting. I've also been interested over the past couple of years in how deliberative processes and community input can be made valuable for model development work. I work in model development work right now, but in a previous part of my life, I've worked on community deliberation in the face of large-scale development projects and things like that. So these two strands, in a sense, come together for me in a really interesting way. So just to give you a little bit of context in terms of my current work, like I work, Local Logic is active in building tools for people that are making and remaking parts of the built environment in cities. So, you know, you can think of real estate developers or municipalities, people who are building large things in cities. So it's a bit far away from YouTube, but at the end of the day, there's a lot of crossover here. Like, we recommend things to help developers build projects that will, you know, help them with the bottom line. But ultimately, where we want to be going is to recommend ways of building that will be better, not just for them, but for the city, right? And so that prompts lots of questions around, well, how do you define what good is? What does it mean for the city to get better beyond allowing a developer to just make money on their development project? You know, do you define that in terms of environmental aspects or affordability, or, you know, any number of other questions, right? And who gets to decide what good city means, right? So I mean, that immediately there's a big overlap with what I'm working on and what you're talking about, even though on face they seem to be quite distant from each other. And anyone who's followed, you know, AI and smart cities and you know, knows that there are big debates around you know, who gets to decide what kinds of technologies are introduced, and who gets to oversee you know, the algorithms that are put into place. If you follow the Sidewalk Labs controversy, you know that these things, public deliberation was a really big part of what actually led to the closure of that project, or the lack of public deliberation, let's say, or input and privacy and whatnot. So these are, I think, central to people who are working in AI well outside of the issue of YouTube and Facebook and news feeds and recommenders. So That brings me back to your presentation, and I'll say that my comments, like Daniel's comments, focus mostly on the TunaSoul proposal, more so than the bulk of the presentation, which was kind of about setting up and framing the problem. I agree that there's a big problem, so I don't want to sort of address many of the points that you brought up in the beginning of your presentation. So a couple of questions and a couple of concerns I have, and there's going to be some overlap with what Daniel brought up. The first is around the question of who, right? Who gets to judge what good, or, you know, as Daniel suggested, what reasonable, what the bounds of reasonable are. In your proposal, you talk about a community of experts, and you define this. You don't really spend much time justifying why, but you define this as people who have, you know, basically email addresses that can prove that they're at universities or public institutions or NGOs, and there's a bit of a ... there. So it's not clear just how long that list is, or why the list is such. I want to point out first that I wouldn't be counted as a trusted reviewer here, because I don't have an email address attached to any of those kinds of institutions, because I work for a company. So immediately, like, I have a self-interest in challenging a bit the list there. But leaving that aside, you know, what I want to do is contrast this with the approach that the We Build AI work, which you mention in a number of the stuff that you've written and talked about, but you didn't mention in your talk today. So I want to take a quick minute to describe what that is. So We Build AI is a project that was led by, I'm forgetting what her name is, but she was at Carnegie Mellon at the time, and she's at UT Austin now, around a framework for participatory AI governance. And basically what they do is they identify key stakeholders for a given project where an algorithm might be put into place. They were doing it in the context of an algorithm that would distribute scarce food resources that have been donated to organizations that need food for food security reasons. They bring together beneficiaries, volunteers, staff, donors to deliberate over what the inputs to a model should be, and, you know, ultimately what the trained model should look like. And so what they do is they make a point of, you know, in advance selecting people who are intimately involved in building, financing, running, and people who are impacted by the algorithm. Okay, so it's like a stakeholder approach to identification of who should be providing inputs. And that's very different. Like, I want to call out the huge difference in the way that you guys approach the building of a community of people who would label and ultimately provide the data that you would train a model on. The community of experts approach is very different, right? It's not about people necessarily who would be the most impacted. It's not about people who are building or running the algorithms in question. Instead, it's about identifying just a loose community of people that you, as a company or an organization, I'm not sure which TunaSoul is, believes to have a firmer handle on truth or reasonableness or something like that. Okay, so that excludes many people who are going to be impacted by what you're building. It excludes potentially the people who are building the technology and maintaining it and so on. No, so my sense is that you do this because the questions that you take up in your presentation around, like, does climate change exist? Do vaccines work? These things maybe seem like they're quote, they're sciencey. They're more natural sciencey, and it seems like the answer to these things is fairly well agreed upon in the scientific community, and therefore you can sort of outsource the labeling of whether or not something is reasonable or right to a community of people that you have no trouble sort of agreeing internally is the community that has the answer that you're looking for. But I worry about what does this mean when it comes to the many other questions where the answer to that question is not so clear. Like, imagine a situation where we're asking about, is the distribution of income in society fair? Or something like this, right? Like, do academics have a better, or people who are inside NGOs necessarily, does that community of people necessarily have a better handle on what the right answer to that question is? Or even something very adjacent to the vaccine question, like, who should be the first population to get vaccines? I mean, that's a very morally morally loaded question, right? It has to do with deciding whose lives are worth protecting first. Even just saying that the thing that you care most about is the number of lives that you save, and reducing it to a quantitative question implies that there's a moral question that's behind that, that indeed you can, that's the right way to answer that question and the right way to measure which answer should come out on top. So I think I have the We Build AI approach is inspiring to me because it brings together people who are, have a vested interest in what's happening, who build, who finance, who deliver, and who are impacted by something. And the approach of a so-called trusted expert group outside the sort of distant expert group that you get to define as a company seems worrying to me, precisely because it doesn't take this stakeholder approach to the community. So I wanted to call that out and see what you thought about that. The second thing is around how. So leaving aside who gets picked to provide input, there's a big question, and I think a big difference with the We Build AI approach to how that input gets collected and made meaningful. So in your model, experts self-identify and they register, and assuming they have an email that qualifies, they get to grade images, compare images, provide input, and that's it. It's kind of like a very individualistic process. You use the data then to build an algorithm that you deploy into the wild, something like this, I'm imagining. So let's compare this to the We Build AI approach. What they do is they go through this exercise of identifying stakeholders. They conduct in-depth interviews to identify what the important axes of reasoning are amongst that community, and thereby identify human understandable features that they can use to build a model. Then they conduct a series of deliberative exercises where they bring those people together to examine the resulting algorithm and to basically debate over whether or not the thing is a good representation of what the community as a whole wants. And so it's a deliberative exercise where you have people who are debating. It's as opposed to individual contribution, it's iterative in the sense that you collect input, you build a model, then you put it back to the community to see what they think, and you amend it and potentially go through multiple iterations of this. So it's an iterative, deliberative process. And it's rooted firmly in an explainability approach where people need to be able to understand why the model is doing what it's doing in order to, say whether or not they agree morally with that approach. Now, I think you can do the deliberative stuff without it being, without explainability being about understanding the actual features. You could do it based on the output and help people generate a mental model of the model or something like that. Nevertheless, the role of deliberation as opposed to individual contribution and the iterative nature of that seems crucial to the We Build AI model, and it's lacking from your approach. And I think that's problematic. And so I'm curious to hear how you might go about building a better procedural apparatus there to collect input and refine the model over time. A couple of other things. So social acceptability, it's not clear to me, this comes back to something that Daniel was saying. It's not clear to me that the community of people who are involved as consumers or creators will see the community that you've identified it as experts as legitimate. Right? And there's a real risk that they don't. And so what happens in that context? We know that there are, social media companies are building ethics boards where they just appoint people that they think are representative of different views to then provide the company with input that they think is representative of what the population thinks. But ultimately, the population does not view that group as sufficiently representative or sufficiently autonomous from the company. And so there's a real danger, I think, that without more intentionally thinking through how you build that community of labelers so that people buy into the notion that you have this community of labelers or communities of experts, you risk basically failing on the social acceptability front. And then a couple of issues around, I guess, how bias can creep in. So let's say, you have a balanced and representative training set of data, which, let's say it's a rare thing, but let's imagine for a second that you have this. If you are collecting input from experts about the truthiness and engaging content, there's a real danger that you could be encoding underlying biases in that community of experts, right? So let's say, for example, These experts are telling you which pieces of reporting they find more scientifically correct or more engaging. And they provide you with lots of input. And it turns out that lo and behold, without them intending to, we hope, you've captured the racial and gender biases of people who have flawed or biased understanding of what something like scientifically rigorous means or engaging content looks like. We don't need to look very far geographically or historically to know that this is a very real problem inside all of the institutions of our society, right? If you look at hiring or leadership inside universities, inside organizations, NGOs, it's everywhere, boards, corporate boards, we know that they're dominated by white male perspectives. And so if that bias is propagated by this community of experts who think that what they're doing is identifying scientifically rigorous content, but ultimately what they're doing is also telling you that scientifically rigorous has a close attachment with whiteness or with maleness or something like that, then you have a problem, right? So that that's not a unique problem for you, but your processes have nothing to deal with that problem. So I'd love for you to think about or tell us a little bit more about how you would how you could make that better than what exists in most other companies. And okay, so for a different context,
Jason,
now
excuse me, can you conclude? I don't know if you have many other points you wanted to raise,
just two more. Non-representative training data. So like wolf snow bias, right? Imagine you have a training set that's non-representative. All the wolves have snow behind them. The model learns that, snow wolf is the same thing and whatnot. So a more pernicious example, if all the training data are news videos with white males in them, then the model learns that white males are what truthiness is associated with. And so who's deciding what content gets labeled, right? That seems like a very, very important part of the whole process. And you don't have anything in your model right now to ensure that that's happening responsibly. So I'll stop there because I don't know.
All right, thank you very much. So, do you want to respond? Maybe take a few minutes to respond, and then we'll open the floor, our virtual floor, to questions from the public. Thank you, Jason and Daniel.
Yeah, thank you a lot for the questions. It's a lot of questions, so I don't know how many hours I have to give an answer. But well, the short thing I would say is that we're thinking about a lot of these things for sure. Like this is on our radar. And we've started a lot of research that's relevant for all of this. One thing I want to stress is that the real goal of TunaSoul is data collection. I think we're really trying to collect a database of what people prefer. And we have this filter from the email address, but it's not a filter for expertise. By that, I mean, so typically there's a project right now in Switzerland to give a unique electronic identification for each Swiss individual. If this is set up, we will be more than willing to use this. I think we should not underestimate the risk of platform being overtaken by bad actors. The second thing I want to stress is the difficulty of the scale, because we know that machine learning only works if you have huge amounts of data. So we need things that scale, and that's why we're trying to build a large database. Now, about what good means. So early on in the COVID-19 pandemic, I was in touch with people at YouTube, and I was asking them to do something about the platform because there was a lot of misinformation or things that were saying that COVID is just a flu, for instance, that were recommended by the YouTube algorithm. And then at some point, I got asked by a YouTube engineer, what would I want to recommend? And it turns out to be extremely difficult. Like I feel like I'm really deep into YouTube. Like I'm a YouTuber, I watch a lot of YouTube contents, but like I didn't know what to recommend. Like. And this is why this is a very difficult question. Like I think this is important to acknowledge, and there's not a single answer to good. So of course, reasonable is if it's reasonable is definitely well, I would say very good. Now about the disagreement, there's a lot to unpack here. I think disagreements typically with the COVID-19 situation, for instance, the case of masks, for instance, was a case where disagreement was actually presented in some way, I guess, desirable. I think a single content can largely do this. Like to me, a great, reliable content on YouTube is a content that does provide the different perspectives and that defends all the perspectives in the best possible way. So like I think this can be included at least in the slider, reliable and not misleading. And I should say there's a wiki on TunaSoul for each slider that points to a wiki page. And on this wiki page, we try to define the different terms, and any contribution is more than welcome. Like we are still trying to settle, like we're still in beta test, so we're still trying to finalize the list of quality criteria that we demand or that we ask from the contributors. So any contribution as well to this Wikipedia, to this TunaSoul wiki page is more than welcome. Yeah. About voting rights. So right now, like every certified contributor, so every contributor that validates an email from a trusted institution can be very large. If it's as long as we can attach it to an entity that's not producing, that will very likely not produce a lot of fake accounts. That's really what we're trying to avoid. Like we're not trying to be expert driven, like we used to be, have this motivation, but by talking to people, we realize that also like building the sliders, like one of the sliders is the importance, the other is another is like diversity and inclusion. I'd say that another one is layman friendliness. I'd say that experts are actually the wrong people to rely on to judge how accessible a content is. So we more than welcome contributions from people who are not who don't have a PhD in the field. However, we do also ask contributors, if they want, of course, to provide information about themselves. So typically, if they do have degrees in a specific field, if they have, we ask them to point to their Google Scholars, for instance. This may be extremely useful to judge the reliability of very technical contents, for instance. So that's why we're trying to build this. And this also has another important role, and is the problem of debiasing the data set. So on my YouTube channel, there's 94% of views that come from male, from boys, from guys. This is a bias that's extremely likely to be found on TunaSoul as well. It's just that people who tend to contribute to these kinds of things and will probably be referred through YouTube, and so there will be inevitably this bias. We are working on algorithms that try to debias this. Essentially, the idea is to give more voting rights to people who are minorities that are underrepresented within the TunaSoul data set. But this is a line of research that needs to be further investigated. I know that we are investigating, but yeah, it's an exciting line of research as well. Yeah, so another thing that we're trying to build for the future of TunaSoul, like it's important also to realize that our algorithms are very simple. I don't think that these are the algorithms that should be deployed on a larger scale, because there's a lot more that can be done by exploiting, for instance, natural language processing analysis of the content. And in particular, one of the things that seem important is to generalize quickly to contents that have not yet been rated, because like the views on YouTube are made within the first 24 hours. In the news, it's even faster than this. So we need to be very reactive. And this demands generalization from previous ratings. And this is a big challenge. But overall, what I mean to say is that the algorithms that we have are going to evolve. And our hope is to create a database to motivate this research on better algorithms to debias the database, while keeping static proofness, Byzantine resilience. It's a huge endeavor, and we don't mean to solve it alone. But, like, we're already overwhelmed, but we're just trying to set up the platform. I do want to say that there is an ongoing project of trying to interview people who are rating the contents on TunaSoul. So I'm working with a sociologist trying to set up this experiment where we would ask different people from different communities, typically journalists or scientists or students or different communities like this, and ask them to rate on TunaSoul and to provide feedbacks on like other things that they were not able to express on the platform typically. Like how can we improve the platform? I guess this is a bit for us a bit selfish, but also one thing we're trying to investigate is whether rating contents on the platform is changing the people's perspective on the problem of content recommendation or moderation. One very interesting in the We Build AI paper, which I strongly recommend this paper, it's a fantastic paper, as you said, is that they did observe an evolution in people's appreciation of the algorithm and the ethics of the algorithm and the changes of the ethics of designing the ethics of the algorithm. And we hope also to get there on TunaSoul. And yeah, I think I can conclude here and can move to questions.
Okay, well, thank you. Thank you for addressing many of the points that were raised so far. It's not over yet, so now we have a good 30 minutes for questions from the public, but also if our discussants wants to come back and add maybe other questions or points, you are welcome to do so. So the way we will proceed is that if you want to ask a question or make an intervention, please write your name in the chat, and then I will allow you to do that. If you write a question in the chat, then I will simply ask the question for you. I know that a few people wrote questions already, but I would ask you, perhaps if you still want to ask that question, simply repost it in the chat. So then I'll know from now, I will start trying to process things chronologically as they have been posted in the chat from now. So please repost your question. Donc, j'explique brièvement en français comment on va fonctionner. Donc, si vous voulez poser une question vous-même, simplement écrire votre nom dans le chat et je vous donnerai la parole. Si vous écrivez une question dans le chat, je vais poser la question à votre place. Vous êtes les bienvenus à poser vos questions en français. Je demanderai à nos intervenants quand même de répondre en anglais. Et si vous souhaitez une réponse en français également, simplement l'indiquer dans la question pour que tout le monde puisse bien comprendre les réponses. Donc, répondez en anglais par défaut. Et voilà. Okay, so I already have one written question from Amin Memarian. So I'm just going to read it as it is. So it goes as follows. Does it make sense to call algorithms safe or dangerous? I think algorithms are inherently neutral. They just do what the designers want them to do. The output could be considered dangerous or unsafe, but the algorithm itself is just doing what it's supposed to do. So a question about the neutrality of technology. Ray.
Well, yeah, I'd say an algorithm is dangerous in the same sense that a nuclear weapon is dangerous. Like these are tools that are out there and they are used by different people. And yeah, I think the safety, or like I think Stuart Russell likes to take the example of a bridge. A bridge can be dangerous if it's not designed to be safe. And I think we should think about algorithms in the same way.
Okay, all right, thank you. Maybe so. I'm not seeing other names in the chat so far. So maybe I can also ask a question. First, I also want to thank you again for your talk and the 2 interventions. Also, I think this was very, very interesting. It's a super important topic, obviously. I think, I mean, in everything that people have said so far, there are at least like 4 different types of problems that have emerged. So the first one, I'll call that the business problem. So let's say we are able to find a way to make good recommendation or recommendation that would be aligned with a conception of the good. We would still face the problem of ensuring that business want to follow that pattern or want to implement that type of alignment in their platform. Most of these, like the organization that are behind Facebook, obviously, or Twitter or social medias are commercial organizations. So their primary, I think, logic or the primary vector of their decision are, of course, a commercial logic. So that's already one issue here that perhaps has not been discussed as much in everything that has been said so far. So, but that's the first problem. The second problem is what we could call simply the pluralistic problem. And I think Daniel touched right upon that right from the beginning. So there are many conceptions of the good out there. and there are even many conceptions of justice. So how exactly can we align the recommendation made by algorithm in a pluralistic society? Okay, there may be something like an overlap of these conceptions, but that's not quite sure. So that's problem number 2. A third problem is so what I think you referred to, Lei, as the well, codification problem or representation problem. So how can we code? Let's say we would agree on a conception of the good, like socially speaking. How can we code or represent that conception of the good in a way that is both formal and finite? Okay, just representing a cat is super complicated already. So how could this work with a conception of the good? And then the fourth category of problems are all perhaps the more technical or implementation problem that come with your specific proposal with TunaSoul. So how can we avoid fake accounts, people that would use the platform in malicious ways? How can we incentivize collaborators to rate things? How do we deal with the issue of interpersonal comparison of preferences? I saw the way you do it. That's interesting. That's clever, because we're always comparing 2 videos. So that's the one way to solve that problem. So at least 4 general categories of problems. So I think the last 3 categories have been addressed so far in what you said and the question that were raised, but you haven't said much about the first one. So what I call the business problem. So what is the best way to, even if you were successful in developing that TunaSoul platform, now what's the best way to ensure that an actual recommendation on YouTube is aligned what people think is a better recommendation? Is it to have like coercive laws? Is it to, so anyway, what's the best way to address that problem?
That's a very important question, and unfortunately also very challenging. I have grown a lot more pessimistic over the last few months with the Timmy Gobu affair with Google, and not only the fact that so Timmy Gobu, the co-lead, the now ex-co-lead of the AI ethics team in Google, was let off by Google, and well, this is extremely disappointing. The reason behind, I think, actually has a lot to do with Google's latest trillion parameter language model. So this is even more like it's really an AI ethics problem. So this is even more concerning. And what was even still more concerning still to me is that the reaction to this story was not as what I would have hoped, like from the external point of view, like from both internal and external. So there was a letter co-signed by 2,600 Googlers, which is good because it's 2,000, but it's only 2% of the company. So that's not that big. I'd say it's not big enough. And it was also co-signed by 4,000 external signatories. And like that's not even 1% of the tech industry. That's like it seems to me that this was a very, very big deal. I think this is a very, very big deal, and I feel like we don't care enough about these things happening. And the big concern is that the ethics team is going to disappear from Google, and that Google is going to focus on improving their algorithms, and the importance of ethics is going to be more and more secondary. So this makes me think that we need a lot more social pressure than we have today. And we need legal pressure, I think, at some point. To get there, I think it's very important that we rely a lot on researchers to audit the platforms, what's going on, the recommendation algorithms, the misinformation, and so on. I think journalists also already involved in this, but there should be a lot more importance given to these things. For instance, there was no, like in the main newspaper in French, Le Monde, there was nothing about the Timmy Gobu, except something that I wrote a month later, which is nowhere near good enough, I think. So yeah, it just gives a lot more importance to this, and to consider regulation solutions. I think this is very, very important if you want to make any progress in making ethics more important.
Okay, thank you very much. So I still So I still don't have other questions. So please, people, just write your name or ask a question in the chat. I'm gonna ask a second question if you don't mind right away, and we'll see or if there are other people that that want to ask a question. My second question, because I'm actually really curious to know what you're gonna say about that. But so at the beginning of the talk, you were saying that there was some form of tension between privacy and what maybe we may call our power to moderate content online, because the more things are private, the more they are like protected and secret, and the less we have an availability to moderate what is going on. But I was wondering if you could say more about that, because I don't quite see the tension in the sense that, so first, even if things are private, that does not take away the possibility for the administrator of the system to moderate some content. Also, it does not take away the power for the people that are already part of the discussion to moderate the content if the system gives them a power to do that. But also, if exchanges were really more private, perhaps that can reduce to some extent their negative impact on society and make moderation less of an issue. So if you think of situation like right-wing extreme groups, of course, in the US, so these groups, they want to be heard, they want to be public, they want to convince as many people as possible. So if we would provide more privacy and make it more difficult to them to speak to a large audience, so reduce the power of the megaphone, if you will. If we reduce that power, well, then they may be considerably less efficient because they will be more marginalized. Perhaps they will develop more extreme views, but that these views will also be more marginalized. So the need to really provide good recommendation or may not be as important as it is right now. So I was just wondering if you could say more about that tension.
Yeah, I think it's a very difficult empirical question to understand social media.
Yeah. One
of the concerns I have is that we know a lot about misinformation that goes through YouTube, through Twitter, or through Facebook groups, because these are public and they have been studied by academics, and there's a lot of very interesting papers about this. On WhatsApp, there are some groups on WhatsApp that are public, and there's a lot of disinformation campaigns that have been found, especially in Brazil. And so you could see that on WhatsApp, this was a problem. But this is because some groups on WhatsApp are public, but a lot of the messaging, in particular, for instance, WhatsApp took the decision at some point to remove the ability to share massively. Like when you have a message, you could not share it to a lot of different people on WhatsApp all at once. And I think there was a news article about this, that this reduced the spread of misinformation. But it's actually very hard for of us to know this has to come from essentially, like even for Facebook, it's very hard to know how misinformation is spread on these different platforms. And another concern is more about cyberbullying. So there's an enormous amount of cyberbullying going on the internet, especially towards minorities and women. So we see a lot of this publicly on YouTube, for instance. Female YouTubers it's very hard to be a female YouTuber because of this. Mm-hmm. And and it is known also that a lot of this harassment goes through private messaging. So a concern, I think, in terms of cyberbullying is that if like private messaging becomes the norm and it's easy, and even if it's encrypted, it may be harder to combat this kind of issues. So that's why I see a tension. Like I personally extremely value privacy. I use Signal a lot, but like it seems to me that there's a risk there. Also, I should mention, so there's a book called The Hype Machine by MIT professor Sinan Aral, who is arguing in this book that a lot of his research on understanding misinformation, typically on social medias, has been hindered by the privacy regulations. like it was an easier excuse to be given by Facebook and so on to say we cannot work with you anymore because, well, of the regulation. So this is also a concern that I would have about the tension between moderation and privacy.
Okay. Well, thank you, Jess. So I have a question in the chat, but Jason said that he had a follow-up on that. So Jason, do you want to start perhaps?
Sure. It's kind of related to what you just said, but it's a larger one as well. So you've said quite a lot about, and it sounds like you guys do a lot of thinking about procedurally how to make inputs from this community fair, representative, and so on. But you've said little or nothing about how TunaSoul itself is governed, right? You guys hold a lot of power. If you massify this thing, you will face the same problem that these networks face, with the social networks face, which is that you will hold enormous power to decide things like what weight should we give to underrepresented groups, who counts as trusted, just how much they count, should I, and so on and so forth. So like, given the moral orientation or the mission of the organization, I would expect that this would be front and center, that you guys would care a lot about not just can you build a trustable, responsible data set, but how do you build a mechanism to ensure that you guys are held accountable? So can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, it's an excellent question. It's definitely something that we are thinking about. So so we started a wiki to be a lot more transparency. For instance, I think is extremely important. So we started a wiki. We're going to release the models. We still like proving theorems about this, writing papers, so keeping private for these reasons. But eventually, we want to make this all public. Moving forward also, so like anyone is welcome to contribute to the wiki. We want to make the code open and allow external contributions. But yeah, we're still going to have a control for over TunaSoul in the next year, just so that things can move forward more quickly. I think in the beginning it's important, but as we move forward, like I'm flattered that you think that we have a lot of power. Right now we have 45 contributors, so we're not there yet. But if we do get, or hopefully when we get more influential, I think it's absolutely critical that we decentralize things. There's a lot of stories in the tech industry of the NSA or like these kind of agencies asking to add backdoors to different things, and we don't know the full of it, but I think there's enough evidence to suggest that this is extremely common. And so we really want to avoid this. So the long-term goal, but this calls for more sophisticated algorithms and a lot more research, and it's difficult. But what we really want is to completely decentralize TunaSoul at some point, and the algorithm would run like a blockchain. And actually, my lab, the lab I'm working on in at EPFL is actually specialized in decentralized computing. And so, yeah, we already have ideas of how this could be done, working on decentralized machine learning in particular, but also the database should be decentralized and so on. But we still would want to have mechanisms to upgrade the protocol, typically using some agreement solution between trusted nodes or something like this. So yeah, this is a difficult project, but I would say that it's definitely on our radar, but it's not yet the time to work on this for us.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, thank you, Jason. That was a really good question. I did not quite set these issues, but you're right. It's interesting. When you'll reach a few billions user, you'll let us know how you managed to.
I hope I won't be receiving. I hope I won't be receiving threats from the NSA at this point.
So I have a question in the chat from Enrika Jan-Karik. I will rephrase slightly. So basically the question is around the idea that if we want to have like an ethical process, we need to be able to merge like deliberative consideration, iterative input, social acceptability, plus expert knowledge and something like wisdom. So of course there's high complexity in that. So how like more precisely can we do that? Can we achieve that?
Yeah, so I guess the wiki is the way we're trying to have a collaborative way of designing TunaSoul. So there's also like the idea that of building some meta TunaSoul. So typically for deciding more precisely how the different voting rights are given for different, depending on expertise, the topic, the slider, and so on. It's not easy just to frame the question in a way to collaborate, especially if there are even 10 collaborators, but if there are millions of them, it becomes very, very complicated. So we're trying to think about this. Again, I think it's too early to like we have other short-term priorities, but the wiki is a way for people to get involved in the design of TunaSoul. So also we're trying to list a lot of resources on the wiki. So if you're interested in contributing in a different way to TunaSoul, that would be a way.
Okay, thank you. All right, well, if you have question, maybe we can wait like a few seconds, a minute to see if other people have questions. Otherwise, I don't know if you want to add something, Daniel or Jason, to the discussion. Yes, Daniel?
I mean, I have some, in a way, questions that are more technical than, so, you know, you mentioned that you had 45 collaborators at the, so what is your, could you say a little bit more about your recruitment strategy, about, you know, how you're going to up those numbers in a way which will get you the, I mean, I assume that, you know, given the way these things work, getting from 45 to 75 will not be enough. You know, you maybe not the 6 billion that Dominique mentioned, but you'll need a lot more. So what is the recruitment strategy to get both a lot and the right kind?
Yeah, it's a very good question. So I'm a science YouTuber, so I have this YouTube channel. So when the platform is ready, I'll make a video on my channel, and hopefully this will draw in hundreds, hopefully thousands of new collaborators. But moving forward, also I'm also in contact with bigger YouTubers than myself, and hopefully, like if someone with millions of subscribers makes a video that makes millions of views, we can have a very solid contributor base. But one thing also I should say is that the big challenge actually today for TunaSoul is contributor retention. Like we want to make sure that people go to the platform, contribute, and actually provide like a lot of data. I think there's also an individual progress in the way we use the platform. So like contributor retention is critical. And so that's why we're working a lot on improving the contributors' experience. Yeah, because this is critical.
Okay, thank you. Jason, is there something you want to add?
Yeah, sure. I have I think it's a technical question, but I'm not sure. So I'm wondering about and concerned about what I call truthiness creep or something like this. That basically, you know, if we look at the We Build AI case, it was quite simple, right? Everyone agreed on a goal, and people had different interests, and so there was a disagreement about how to go about achieving the goal, but they could arrive at some kind of a satisfactory agreement. On YouTube, by no way, shape, or form is there an agreement of goals. People have many goals. Even an individual viewing a single video might have multiple goals, right? Information, entertainment, distraction, whatever, right? There's also all sorts of things happening, not to mention the goals of creators. So, you know, you in the way you present the platform, you stick to, you know, fairly circumscribed cases like, you know, is climate change a hoax or something like this? And I can imagine collecting lots of information about a specific issue that would help you make a map or a model about what, you know, how to identify the boundaries of the reasonable for something like climate change. But how does that propagate then into all of the millions of other questions and use cases that show up? Like if I collect labeled data about climate change, hoaxery, and, you know, what is the impact on something like, is the minimum wage a good thing? Or, you know, like all these other questions. You know, and not to mention you know, maybe outlier ways of communicating, like let's say spoken word or something like that, or like, you know, like you know, a rap song that is politicized about something versus, you know, like an academic talk from a conference or something. And if most of the things that show up are of one sort, then this thing maybe gets cast simply because it's not commonly found in the data set. So I guess I have lots of questions about how this propagates across an ecosystem of many, many use cases and goals.
Yeah, we're counting on researchers to build algorithms to solve this generalization problem. But it's like, so someone tweeted at me, like sent me a tweet recently saying that they noticed that so they use Spotify to listen to music, and they've noticed that the songs were more and more depressing. And this is a big issue if you think about this, because, well, like depressing songs can lead to increased mental health issues and potentially even suicide. So like these contents that seem like just entertainment are actually not just entertainment. Like they also have impacts. The other example I like to take is if you have a cooking video on meat, like, yeah, it's cooking video, it's fine, it's nice, but we know that meat has consequences on animal suffering and climate change. So yeah, how do you judge this video? Like, so we added one slider to, so it's like in the optional sliders, it's called encouraging better habits. But yeah, so hopefully this can capture a little bit of this. Hopefully, like, there's enough diversity in the sliders to express more nuances. We also have comment sections, maybe that could be useful. But yeah, these are definitely difficult questions.
Okay, well, thank you very much. Thank you, Lee, Danielle, Jason, everyone. I'm not seeing other questions, so I think we can finish the meeting now. I think I'm afraid now, like the main thing I will remember from your talk is that songs are getting more depressing on Spotify. That is so true. So thank you for enlightening us with that wisdom. Hopefully it won't like erase all the very important thing you said before. No, but more so you see, thank you very much